Dead by Daylight is in its 10th year now, but unlike other live service games that have been around for a decade, there's a huge disparity when it comes to Dead by Daylight in the innovation department. Despite the minor graphical and quality of life updates, the gameplay has essentially stayed exactly the same, especially over the past 5 years. This is due to the three main pillars that govern the game. One obviously being the developer's behavior interactive, the second being content creators for the game, and the last being the community or the general player base. All of these pillars are heavily intertwined, and together they have weaved a vicious web around the game that does not allow for any innovation to find its way through. There's no better example of this than the devs dedicating 2025 to being the year of quality of life, and then pathetically withdrawing almost every major change they intended to push through to the live game. Basically, anything directly involving actual gameplay was scrapped. Now, if we focus on the first pillar, the devs, ultimately the road starts and ends with them. In order to talk about DBD in relation to the devs in 2026, we need to consider that they see DBD entirely as a product at this point. It's a business and not at all a video game or something that's driven by artistic passion like it originally was when they were a true indie company. Now, clearly that's not true of all the actual developers at the studio, but it doesn't matter because in the end, the suits of behavior or the management level of behavior have the final say in everything, and they only see the game as numbers. That doesn't just mean money, it also means KPIs, key performance indicators. There are staff members at Behavior that never touch the game in any way. Instead, they sit every day analyzing data, and they have data for absolutely everything. You can even request your own data from their website, just no longer your MMR data, but that's a different topic. But you will see that they collect data about absolutely everything that happens in the game. Player numbers, player retention, what killers drive players off the game, what perks cause people to stop playing, who spends the most money, etc., right? Essentially anything you can think of is collected as data, and it's analyzed on a daily basis. And every one of these metrics have their own individual KPI targets that are ruthlessly pursued by every level of management. So if you ever ask yourself, like, why does it feel like the devs are so out of touch with the game? It's not that they're out of touch or necessarily incompetent, it's that they're playing an entirely different game, right? And this often presents itself in reality as really tone-deaf changes because the suits see the data, and in that data, there is always a problem, something that's not good enough, like an infinite what could be better question that always has to outperform the previous day or previous week. And their only thought is, how can we make these numbers hit our KPI targets that are always getting higher? The answer for them is to make a sandwich we didn't order and then try to force feed it to us even if it's a shit sandwich. The reason being that shit sandwich is a solution to their infinite question, and this is really where the data and reality start to collide. Let me give you a hypothetical made-up example. In the data, survivors who play against Legion are 5% more likely to get off the game after a match. Then management will see that, right? And they'll be like, wow, Legion is clearly a problem and needs to be made more fun to play against. In comes a Legion nerf into the next patch notes. Now, this is where that second pillar of government would come into play. Content creators and the content creator community. See, the devs in this example just dedicated 2 to 3 months of work developing a Legion change that nobody asked for, because in the mind of the management, people obviously want a nerf because the data proves players don't like Legion. So get rid of Legion, more people play, which equals more money. It's kind of the mindset. Now in enters content creators. So in other live service games, content creators are usually brutally honest and very critical of developers. It's that criticism that creates friction, and it's that friction that helps push those games to innovate. However, in DBD, the majority of content creators are highly political for a number of unique reasons. One reason is that devs will literally blacklist you if you heavily criticize them. This has happened with numerous creators, including myself. Hell, even a lot of CCs added to their new creator program have already been removed for being too critical. And you might say, well, that's weird because like I'm in the creator program, or maybe I know somebody who's in the creator program that criticizes heavily without getting kicked out of it. And well, that's either because they've reached the deity level of content creator, like someone who basically cannot be punished, or it's because they're a smaller creator and behavior just hasn't heard the criticism yet. Because believe me, when they do, that creator is no longer going to be in the program. Criticism in the creator program means you have to walk on eggshells at all times. You have to be political. The second issue is the us versus them mentality of DBD, where creators have to choose each word like they're navigating a minefield, or they risk losing half of their audience. The third reason is cannibalism. Yes, you step out of line in any way in the DVD community, you try to go against the grain, and other content creators are just waiting, and they will literally try to cannibalize you and take your audience. I've seen it a dozen times. Someone has a slightly hot take in the community that doesn't align with like the narrative, and they basically bully them into giving up or conceding their opinion. It's a generalization, to be fair. There are of course good content creators out there, but the majority sadly will take any opportunity to cannibalize others to attempt to grow their own audiences. It's really disgusting, and like the sad part is that it's usually fruitless anyway. No personality Andes will never grow their platforms through cannibalization. However, like these same cannibalistic content creators will treat bigger CCs like deities that could do absolutely no wrong. To be honest, the whole like content creator scene in DVD is so disgustingly pretentious that I truly cannot partake in it at all anymore. Again, there are exceptions, but they're few and far between. The fourth issue with being a content creator is the great irony, right? They're completely locked into milquetoast opinions because of reasons 1 through 3 that we just talked about, but also trapped in a content algorithm that only promotes a negativity. So they pretty much have to complain 24/7 to keep viewership, but aren't allowed to present a unique opinion that hasn't been anointed or vetted by the rest of the community already. So a great example of like how this translates to the game and how it actually affects you, we need to pivot back to our Legion example we mentioned earlier. The devs present 2 changes in the patch notes. Idea A is a nerf to Legion because nobody likes to play against him according to the data. So a bigger CC will complain that the change is bad only after testing it on the PTB, even though they knew it was a bad change the second they read the patch notes. But again, you always have to be political, right? So they wait to actually test the changes. Then after they do that, all the other smaller CCs follow behind and regurgitate that opinion because it's become the anointed negativity that allows you to complain without the risk of retaliation from the devs or other content creators. That said, other features in the patch notes will be a new feature or mechanic that might seem like it's well-intentioned from the devs, but even with the smallest level of foresight, any critically thinking person would realize it's going to cause other huge issues in the game. But these content creators cannot criticize those mechanics because to do so would put them at a high risk, and these CCs are so fragile, the slightest pressure or scrutiny and they will cave immediately. They literally are constantly doing risk management to move within the herd. There are outliers to this. There are content creators that always move opposite of the herd and ones that always stay straight down the middle with every single opinion, but very few who just come to their own opinions on everything. So how does that translate to the real game? Take for example the removal of grade D ranking. Even when grades meant nothing more than BP rewards, behavior removed the ability to D-rank when playing poorly. I immediately called this out as a terrible idea, specifically because I knew it would lead to survivors having no incentive to play out a losing match. So of course this led to an enormous issue. People called it the Go Next epidemic. That's how severe it got. That many survivors were giving up at the drop of a pin. And this was largely due to the fact that content creators knew it was an unpopular criticism to make and were too feckless to push back against it when it actually mattered, which is when it got announced. Now, I could give you a dozen examples of this happening. It's happening right now with the abandoned mechanic, conditioning survivors to give up at the slightest annoyance. But it all doesn't matter because there's an ecosystem of anti-criticism solidified around the game. Now, you might say, well, that's not true, Choi. I see creators criticizing the game constantly. But the difference is they always wait too long. They wait for the problem to be so big that it can't be ignored anymore. The proverbial, "this is the straw that broke the camel's back" line. Yet they refuse to take responsibility for letting those straws stack so long that they do break the camel's back. And more than that, they'll spend their time and energy arguing or discrediting someone like me who was trying to get ahead of the problem when the problem was still in its infancy, right? Then, once the fire engulfs the forest, they suddenly become historians of convenience, revising the past like they were always against it and gaslighting their glue-sniffer audience into believing it. A great instance of this is when the content creator community dragged me through the mud back in 2024 when I said and showed objectively that slugging had become significantly more beneficial than going for hooks. And that wasn't trying to encourage slugging, it was trying to encourage making hooks more valuable to get, right? But the amount of shitty interactions I had with this community, with other content creators, it was crazy. And I'm not talking about like the fair criticism. I always engage with fair criticism, but a lot of these content creators try to cannibalize me. I was just fortunate that I couldn't possibly give less of a shit what these people think about me. But sadly, most people do care, and it's that bubble of fear that keeps the game immune to valuable criticism, especially from the people that it matters most from. Retroactive complaining will never be anywhere near as impactful as getting in front of these issues before they do the permanent damage. Again, if you look at Twitter, Reddit, YouTube, everyone right now is saying that slugging is more valuable than hooking. Oh, look at that. I was right. I was just too early to the party. And before anyone says that this was just because of fast track, no, that's just the straw that broke the camel's back. So the devs will see the criticism now and they'll throw killers a worthless bone like nerfing fast track, and everyone will pretend that fixed everything because that's what you do in this stagnant environment of zero gameplay innovation. So that brings us to the final pillar, the community. Not just the content creator community, but the general player base too. This is where you really get into the us versus them mentality. Everything they see is through a tribal lens. The first out of the gate issue with that is there are more of them than there are of us, essentially, meaning it's a popularity contest and Survivor is more popular, meaning they control the majority of the narrative, and obviously the devs and content creators are going to have to pander to that side of the community. But it goes deeper than that. The general DBD community is so oddly aggressive, stupid, and miserable. I would be lying if I said I knew exactly why. I do lean into it as sort of a parody in my own content, but honestly, like the origin of it still baffles me a bit. It could be a wild take, but it's possible that because DBD was largely built on content that revolved around bullying killers and making killers like rage quit, it could be the case that it attracted a large audience of people with that sort of sadistic urge to make other people feel bad, and that toxicity sort of just bled into like all corners of the community, especially the comp side of the community. I really hope that most of you will never have the displeasure of dealing directly with the comp community, because they are like irredeemably toxic and honestly just very weird. It's like, imagine if you locked someone in a room for 20 years and the only thing you let them do was play Dead by Daylight and nothing else. That's kind of what it feels like when you're dealing with somebody from the comp community and DBD. Regardless, my point with that is that at least a large portion of the DBD player base is unhinged and incredibly disingenuous. They will lie and do whatever it takes to keep the game the way they want it. Making it better for everyone is never the agenda with these people. This is always most easily identifiable with anyone who defends like the absolute bullshit in the game. 4-man swifts, S-tier killers, shitty maps, broken perks, broken items, and of course like things that go outside the game as well. That's even easier to detect. Like reshade, for example, players will sit there with presets for every map in the game to min-max every possible advantage. Contrast, shadows, brightness, all of it. Now reshade is whitelisted, so it's not like it's bannable, but these people will sit there and mock you for acting like it has any impact in the slightest way or offers any advantage at all. And this is actually insanely effective gaslighting. The narrative is so controlled that they will make it seem like you are a literal buffoon for just suggesting it provides an advantage. They did the same thing with stretch resolution before the devs removed it from the game. These people are degenerate liars, and sadly, they have the most sway within the community. Let me give you a recent instance of this. I just saw on Twitter a new DBD overlay that you can download, and it lets you visually see macro timers on your screen for things like decisive strike and borrow time, so you know the exact internal millisecond that you can hit someone or pick them up to avoid DS. The post itself literally says, in competitive high MMR DBD, timing is everything. One mistake on borrowed time or DS can instantly cost you the game. If you play to win, you cannot afford that. That's what the post says. So I wrote, with genuine intent by the way, how many micro cheats are in the game now? A micro cheat or soft cheating is like any third-party software that is used for an advantage, right? It's not a judgment. I'm just asking how many are in the game, as I actually don't know. I know of like reshade, crosshairs, or like whatever it might be, things that are basically not available for vanilla players. It's a simple question, and after like 35,000 views on the post, I didn't get a single true answer to my actual question. Instead, just insane levels of aggression and passive aggression. Like this reply here, is it micro cheating to have a clock in your room? 44 likes on this reply, by the way. This is a fallacy known as an appeal to mockery. They mock your point socially to discredit you instead of addressing it logically, because in a logical argument, they would lose. If having a clock in your room was effective, this wouldn't be something that needed to exist, right? Another person said, is it cheating to count in my head? Again, a bullshit reply. Try counting to 60 in your head while playing in a stressful match to know the exact pinpoint millisecond moment decisive strike goes away. Try it. Do you realize, like, if this feature was base kit, no killer would ever have to get hit with DS ever again unless they chose to take it or got like baited into a grab? That's how crazy of an advantage this actually is. Further proof of my point, here is someone who is in the creator program who ignored my question completely to personally attack me in like a gotcha moment. They said, is it cheating to use an alt account to queue for lower MMR games? So this is a it's okay for me but not for thee type of situation, I think. I'm not sure completely, but what they're referring to is a video I made 6 months ago where I showed a flaw in the MMR system where you could 2-box, which basically means that you queue with 2 accounts and one of them is a lower level account, and you do this to get less sweaty matches. Now, you have to understand that I do a lot of MMR experiments, and a lot of what the community knows today about MMR is directly due to the research that I've done. One of such experiments was making an actual 0 MMR account, not the starting MMR, right, of 600, but actually 0 MMR, all the way to the bottom. And there I found plenty of content creators farming content and farming clips, especially TikTokers. I found a lot of them, right? But let's get back to the specific 2-boxing experiment. I found as a player in the top 5% bracket, playing against metaslaves all day, that this lowered my MMR just enough to not only get a bigger variety of killers to play against, but that a lot of the killer players were actually better players. They just didn't rely on meta to hard carry them. They were higher skilled players, it just wasn't Blight and Ghoul on an endless cycle. It reminded me way more of like rank-based matchmaking, and it also allowed me to run less sweaty builds as well. I also presented this as like a way for people to help get their friends into the game in a way that would prevent them from just getting hard tunneled at a higher MMR that they shouldn't be in at the start of the game, right? Yet here is this person in the shield program, creator program, insinuating to other people I was doing it to stomp noobs and get easy matches, right? Like just to cheat, all in a very passive aggressive way. So it was a very skewed misrepresentation about something I did 6 months ago. Yet you will never catch one of these people, never catch them saying anything negative to one of the anointed content creators for doing any of that in their endless Smurf challenges. In fact, they'll glaze those challenges as their favorite content, even though objectively it's significantly more damaging to less skilled players than 2-boxing is. It actually makes me want to take a shower, just seeing how fake and manipulative and two-faced a lot of these people are. So in the end, there's basically just a toxic shield around DBD's core design that does not allow for any innovation, and every change has to be done with like the death by 1,000 cut strategies because they can't let anybody know really where they're going. It's like boiling a frog in water. It's a horrible ecosystem of greed, incompetence, idiots, sadistic sycophants, jealousy, just all the words. It's something I was more than happy to distance myself from, to be honest, and all the 3 pillars that govern the game that are required for the gameplay to actually innovate are just in a perpetual stalemate with each other. The devs fostered it, right? It's their fault. They push people away who don't worship them and focused on blind loyalty over honesty. So they have nobody to blame but themselves, but to be fair, I'm sure they don't care. The whole thing honestly feels like some kind of crazy psychological experiment at this point. I mean, you really have to just stop expecting things to change. Not because they can't, right? But because everything around the game is structured to prevent it. With everything I've talked about so far, at least to me, it's clear gameplay innovation has become impossible by the design of it all. So like, what is left? It's not frustration anymore. I know that it's something every passionate person in the DBD community will have to learn at some point. Not everyone will reach that mindset at the same time. I know others have reached it before me, but like eventually reality catches up to the expectation. And when it does, you either accept the situation and what the game is, or you just lose your fucking mind. Anyway, much appreciated for watching. And as always, have a good one.